seeing on the news this morning, a little Catholic school was shot up, 20 babies dead in Minneapolis. Another good old Democratic hellhole. You know, and the problem is not that it's Democratic policies. People hear that and they go, what does it matter? You know, what does it matter if it's a democratically run, city? What does that matter? Well, this is what matters about it, okay? People who gravitate towards the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party, and I'm using the very broad, superficial terms. I wouldn't categorize myself as a Republican. I'm a Christian conservative, and I'm only conservative politically insofar as conservatism means, you know, the conservation of deep, meaningful, objectively true ideas, right? And then when it departs from that, then I'm no longer politically conservative when conservatism deviates from what the word actually means. People who have those beliefs typically gravitate towards generally Republican, politics. Now, there are a lot of Republicans that are really only fiscally, quote unquote conservative, and socially they really don't have any sort of deep, meaningful moral positions. But those who lean Democratic are typically socially liberal, they're morally liberal, right? Which basically just means they reject, in practice at least, the idea that there is really any objective truth value. And so they end up sort of acting as their own gods. That's really what ends up happening, because we're all going to serve something. We all ultimately worship something. People who think that, worship is a strictly religious practice and it's isolated only within the four walls of a religious institution with their narrow understanding of religiosity. That's not how that works. Worship means to give something its worthship. So we all worship something. We all create value hierarchies by which we operate in our day-to-day lives. So some people worship in practice their spouses. Some people worship in practice their kids. Some people worship in practice their jobs. And many, many people worship themselves. So it has to do with a proper orientation of who I am in relation to the top of the hierarchy, which is God, the actual only being which is truly objective and who is objectivity himself, because he's the only being which can be subject to absolutely nothing. So just by definition, God as a necessary, self-existing, uncaused, first cause, it is objectivity. And that which flows from him is objectively sourced, and therefore his decrees are objectively true and just. So that's kind of how that works out. So when in a society you forget that idea, when you abandon that idea, and instead you say something really, really stupid like diversity is a value in and of itself, and it's a value so valuable that we're going to pursue it at the expense of other pursuits, of other meaningful things, of we're going to pursue it at the expense of safety, we're going to pursue it at the expense of actual morals and ethics, right? What ends up happening then is you end up having a tremendous amount of ideological pervasion, and different people then with these different ideas on the basis of, hey, we love people of all different types of skin color and all that, which is great, that's good. That type of quote-unquote diversity is fine, that's wonderful. That ends up being conflated with ideological diversity, and we end up saying, well, different cultures, they're intrinsically tied to a person's biological race, and therefore we have to basically adopt all of those, and we have to we have to basically include all of those cultures into our culture, which is kind of the opposite of real assimilation. And then you end up having all sorts of conflicting ideologies, and when people aren't agreed on a chief aim, a chief goal, when they don't agree on the most fundamental, meaningful things in reality, like whether or not truth even exists, the value of human life, what individuals' responsibilities to one another are, when those things aren't agreed upon, then you have chaos. And when you have chaos, then the superstructure of the American society, which was built on some deep, meaningful, fundamental values, that superstructure begins to fall because the foundation on which it was built is crumbling. And goofy people who don't understand this they then get angry. They get angry that there's not any more social cohesion. They then get angry that men and women aren't having good relationships anymore, and 50% of people, in my age group, basically said they have no intention of getting married, and they end up getting disenchanted because houses are so expensive, they can't be bought anymore. And now you have to have two working families because you have to have two working parent families because we chose to outsource the role of parent to the federal government and send mama to work. All these things have consequences, and then people end up being really angry about it and disenchanted by it all. And then they get mad. They get mad and they start to retaliate and act out because of their recognition of the fact that things aren't working out, alongside the adoption of a worldview that says, hey, all of reality is oppression dynamics. And if you don't have something, it's not because you've adopted a bad set of ideas that generate horrible outcomes. It's because someone else has taken advantage of you, and you need to go right that wrong with violence. And it's absolutely horrific. And until we accept the idea that there is a God, we are not him, we ought to do what he says we should do, and things will go better in accordance with how well we're able to implement his design in our lives. Until we do that, we'll continue to have disastrous outcomes, and children will continue to die by the hand of psychopaths who have adopted horrible ideas, most of which are propagated or perpetuated by modern American academics. So